Moving on, Germany warns the UK of the possibility of London leaving the European Union if it insists on breaking EU immigration policies.
The German government stands by its policy. First of all, Great Britain needs to clarify which role it wants to play in the future. This topic is not a bilateral issue between Germany and the UK. It's an issue where all European partners are involved, and it has an impact on all European partners.
The spokesman for Chancellor Angela Merkel said that EU principles were not negotiable. Siebert was referring to UK efforts to curb the level of migration from the EU into Britain. His comments come as Merkel reportedly warned British Prime Minister David Cameron that putting limits on immigration from other EU nations would be, quote, a point of no return. During the last EU summit, Merkel tried to convince Cameron not to put limits on the number of EU citizens allowed to work in Britain. Nagus Mabalagh is our correspondent who joins us from London. Tell us more about this. Well, Nagus, what a warning coming from Angela Merkel there. I guess things are really going down between her and Cameron. I'm guessing this is not a personal thing. Merkel just standing up for EU principles when it comes for that not to be broken and maybe other countries to follow suit.
It's certainly not personal. This is all politics. And for all we know, it could be against David Cameron's own personal opinions. But we know that at the moment in Britain, anti-EU and specifically anti-immigrant sentiment is at its peak. Not only that, in the realm of politics, with the rise of UKIP getting its first MP, really making waves in mainstream politics and really being bolstered by mainstream media. They give a lot of attention to UKIP. What's happened is that the whole of politics has had to shift to the right. That's including the left-wing parties, including Labour and the Liberal Democrats. But for the Conservatives in particular, who are losing voters to UKIP, as we're getting nearer to next year's general election, they're trying to act as if they are being tough with Europe. But of course, that is bringing up all these problems, and I think Angela Merkel is trying to say to David Cameron, look, I know you have your domestic politics to deal with, but be certain that there are red lines, and Britain can't just have this gun-ho attitude with Europe, say whatever it wants against the European Union domestically, throw its weight round and say it's not going to make payments, it's not going to do this, that and the other, and for it not to have consequences. I think this is quite significant for David Cameron, because what he's been trying to do this whole time is walk that tightrope of maintaining good relations with the EU, and he's made it clear that even if there is a referendum to stay in Europe or not, he will support and be in favour of remaining in the EU. But at the same time, he wants to walk that tightrope and make it sound to the domestic audience that he's not letting immigration run wild or letting EU law override British values, for example. But what's ironic, of course, Kaveh, is that this whole thing has come about because in the recession, during the time of difficulty, financial difficulty for the British public, the politicians and a big part of the media scapegoated immigration. They scapegoated foreigners. They scapegoated Europeans and Muslims as the problem as to why so many normal British people are suffering, when that wasn't the problem at all. Of course, the problem was the big banks, the financial crisis, how the government is bailing out banks and giving big bonuses and not doing anything about that. And this is the kind of atmosphere that breeds these political problems, because they finger-pointed. They blamed and scapegoated immigration. And the consequence of that is that many people in the British public, many would say they are misinformed. That's why they have this sentiment. They're looking then to the politicians to do something about it. And there is David Cameron stuck between a rock and a hard place. Well,
you know, you touched on a very important fact there. I think the obviously general public is misinformed, because you're having these far-right parties, well, they're promoting the fact of immigration, anti-immigration. It's anti-Muslim within the promotion of anti-immigration. Many of the parties, we could talk about Geert Wilders, for example. We could even talk about Marine Le Pen. But the heart of the matter is the fact that there's a recession that brought about these parties. Now, how much is Cameron going to push for this in-out vote or referendum? Because that's going to happen next year, from my understanding. And is there going to be a strong push behind that? How's that going to go down?
Well, basically, he said if there's a Tory government next general election, or coming out of next general election, then there will be an in-out referendum. The EU and immigration is now a top political issue. There's nothing that can be done about that. That's the reality. Although a lot of commentators would say, for example, there's now debate about the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, taking part in the debates running up to the general election. And many people are pointing out and saying, hold on a minute, why are UKIP getting so much airtime? OK, fine, they've got one MP in Parliament now, but the Green Party has several MPs in Parliament, and their leader doesn't get to take part in these debates, these leader debates running up to the general election. So there is actually a real sense and a criticism from many political commentators saying that this anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, and it's not just anti-Muslim, in Britain, for example, there is a lot of anti-Eastern European sentiment, for example, towards Polish people, for example, or other blocs in Eastern Europe. So that sentiment is there, and many are saying it's actually being fuelled by mainstream media and mainstream politicians, and it could have some serious blowback for the Conservatives, because if their vote is split in the next general election, so Tory voters vote UKIP, it's more likely that Labour will get a stronger vote, and if there's going to be a coalition, it might be a Labour-Lib-Dem coalition. So interesting state of affairs for British politics at the moment, but certainly very worrying that there's been a general shift, whether it's in Britain or across Europe, to the right.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. Nagus Mawala, correspondent there from London.